to Sacred Plates. I don't know about where you are, but this weekend here, it's nice and cool, and it just says chilly weather to me. So it's time to make my, we'll say famous Instant Pot chili. A friend actually shared this recipe with me several years ago when my family and I were on the Whole30 diet. We found that it's not only great for that, but it's just a really good basic chili recipe. It's got some ingredients I've never used before, but you'll notice that it's a very complex and a very nice flavored chili. My preference actually is to serve this, believe it or not, over a baked sweet potato. They're in the oven, and it really complements the nutritional value as well as the taste of the sweet potato. And when you have friends over in the fall, it's just a nice, warm, comforting way to greet your guests and serve a nice, basic, great dish around the fire pit, in the living room by the fire, or even watching the ball game on television. So now let me go through the ingredients that we're going to be using today. We have 2 tablespoons of coconut oil or vegetable oil, coconut if you're doing Whole30, 2 cups of diced onions, 4 cloves of garlic minced, 2 pounds of ground beef, and then combined together, you're going to have 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 2 tablespoons of chili powder, 2 tablespoons of ground cumin, 1.5 tablespoons of cocoa powder, yes, believe it or not, cocoa powder, and it doesn't matter what type, 1 teaspoon allspice, 1 teaspoon of salt, and I like to put 1 teaspoon of ancho chili powder if I have it, and I usually do. I think it gives a little more complex flavor. Also, you're going to need 6 ounces of tomato paste, a small can of fire roasted diced tomatoes, and 2 cups of beef broth. So now let me show you how to throw this together. I'm going to be using my Instant Pot today. You can definitely do it in your stove or in your crock pot or your slow cooker. I like to do it in my Instant Pot because it works so fast, and the complexity of the flavor with the pressure cooking is absolutely fantastic. So let's put this together. So you begin with your oil. You pour your oil in. I've got my Instant Pot on saute warmed up. You're going to take your oil and you're going to put in your diced onions. Once you put those in, you're just going to stir them and let those onions get cooked. And I like to get mine not only softened, but just a little bit on the brown side. And while those are cooking, one quick tip. Often you have onions around the house, maybe even that are on the verge of going bad, or you use a recipe and it only uses half an onion. What I've started doing is mincing my onions. Go ahead and mince the whole onion. Use what I need, or go ahead and just dice them when I get them, or when I think I may not be using them. And just put them in a old plastic bag, squeeze the air out of it, put it in the freezer. And then anytime you need onions, you've got them. I know you can buy them like that in the grocery store, but onions are really cheap, and it's a great way to make sure you're not wasting your onions and throwing them away needlessly. So a little tip for you today on onions. Also another tip, notice my beef is in a small bag and it's flat. Often, because it's cheaper, I'll buy the larger containers of the ground beef. I measure them into a 1 or 2 pound bag, and then I flatten those. The reason I flatten them is if you need to defrost them. If they're flat, it's less surface area, and they really do defrost sitting on the counter very quickly. Sometimes in an hour or so, you can be ready to cook. So I flatten those out, I pop those in the freezer, and then I'm ready to pull them out. Obviously ahead of time if I know, but even at the last minute, it's much easier to defrost it than use your ground beef. So consider that little tip next time you're buying beef. And you'll see those onions are starting to brown nicely now. I'm going to take my garlic, I'm going to put that in. I'm just going to really saute those around a little bit until they become fragrant, about 30 seconds or so. It doesn't take that long, and you'll really begin to smell those diced garlic really smelling nice. And then once you start smelling the garlic, it's time to put in the ground beef. that in there. Once you get it in there, you're going to start breaking it up in the pan. And again, this works the same if you're on your countertop or you're obviously working in Instant Pot. If you're using a crock pot, then you're going to want to do this on top of the stove and then dump it into the crock pot once your meat is done. So now I'm just going to let this saute and brown up very nicely. So we've got the ground beef and the onions sauteed and nice and browned. I don't like a lot of the fat from the meat in my chili, so I like to take mine to the sink and I drain it. Often, if I don't have spices in here, and in this one we don't, then I often take hot water and rinse over that, and that gets even more of the fat out if that's really an issue for you. If you don't mind it, of course you can leave it back in. Now it's time to do a little more magic to this great meat and onions that we have in our pot. So to our ground beef and onions, we're going to add all of our spices. You're going to want to really stir those up good. Get those mixed in there. Already start smelling so good. You see, the meat starts to get darker. You can really start to smell. You can smell the cocoa in particular right now. And then once you do that, you're going to take your tomato paste. You're going to stir it in really good. And then you're just going to let it cook for about 2 minutes or so, just to kind of let all that goodness get meshed together. You see I'm getting it all mixed up and evenly distributed in my pot there. So that's had time to simmer and really get to smelling really nice at this point. So now we're going to put in our diced tomatoes. Now, fire roasted really are the best. I know they're not as easy to find in the grocery store. More and more days now you can find them, but they really do make a difference in this recipe. And then once I get those stirred in, I'm going to pour in my beef broth. Now, obviously, you can use water. You can even use chicken broth if you have it, but beef broth really gives a complexity to this. You can get that all stirred up, and then we're going to be ready for the last super easy step. So now that we've got it all in there, it's just a matter of an Instant Pot of putting the lid on and turning it. Now I usually put it on meat stew, which does a really good job fairly quickly of getting it ready. I do release the steam once it is done, and then it is stirred up and it's ready to go. Now, if you don't have an Instant Pot or you want to use it on a stove, then probably about 2 hours of simmering on the stove top will be just right, or in a crock pot, slow cooker, I would do about 6 or 8 hours on low is what I would do. It's really a great recipe and really recommend it. Do note it does not have any beans in it. You're welcome to add beans if you wish. That's what attracted us to the recipe at first, was its lack of beans made it Whole30 compliant. But we learned that in certain uses, like with sweet potatoes or over certain things, sometimes the beans just aren't needed, and this particular version of chili has such a nice flavor, there's really no need for them. Hope you enjoy this. I hope as you sit around and watch the football game, and you'll enjoy your chili and your sweet potatoes. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on Sacred Plates.